Please note that in this show, you might hear graphic descriptions or language that may not be appropriate for everyone. Listener discretion advised. Welcome to Parentless Podcast. I am your host, Stephanie Relaford. On this show, we're going to be speaking with others who have experienced the loss of one or both of their parents or parental figures. As we heard in episode 12 with Louisa Velarde, being parentless is like an island, and I don't know how to swim. Thank you for being my life jacket.
Hi, I'm Leah Carey. I am a sex and intimacy coach. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm 47 years old, white, cisgender woman. I am not married, but I do live with my boyfriend. And I also host a podcast called Good Girls Talk About Sex, where I interview women about their sex lives.
Why are we here? Who is your person?
So both of my parents are now gone. My father died in 2000 when I was 26, and my mother died in 2015 when I was 41. And they are both very big losses for very different reasons.
Okay. So do you want to just start with Dad?
So my dad died very, very suddenly. He was away on a work trip. He was, I think, 59 years old, had a history of high blood pressure. But other than that, as far as I knew, he was in, pretty average health. And then he had a massive stroke one night in his hotel room. And I feel every time I talk about this, I just go back to that moment of what it must have been like for the hotel maid, because she literally walked into his room. He was sitting at the desk in the hotel room with his laptop open in front of him, naked, because apparently he had just gotten out of the bathtub, which is something like he was somebody who liked to take baths a lot, and he was dead. So that had to have been a hell of a shock for the maid to walk in on. And so I got a call from my stepmother. I think it was actually about 24 hours later. She did not call me right away. But yeah, I got a call from my stepmother saying, "Are you sitting down? You should sit down." I was like, that's a weird way to start a conversation. So he and I had a very difficult relationship. He was an alcoholic, a very high functioning alcoholic. The type of alcoholic who had a high standing in a variety of different communities. And so I did not feel like I was allowed to say to anybody, there's a problem in my family, because I would have somehow been injuring his reputation. He also had a lot of behaviors that at the time I didn't understand. Obviously, I was a kid. Just in these last few years, since the former president was being elected, there were a lot of articles and stuff going around about narcissism. And I read them and I thought, oh my God, this is like point by point my relationship with my dad, telling me that I hadn't seen or heard things that I had actually seen or heard, telling me that he didn't do things that I had seen him do, telling me that, giving me the silent treatment. Like if I did something that displeased him, he would give me the silent treatment for days or weeks at a time. Just pretend that I didn't exist in the house with him. Just point after point. And so I can't, obviously 20 years posthumously, I can't diagnose him as a narcissist, but I can confidently say that he had a lot of narcissistic behaviors that I didn't understand what it was. So I just thought that I was bad. I thought that I spent a lot of my life thinking I was crazy, because if I thought something had happened and he told me it hadn't, who was I to believe?
Right. What kind of feeling did you have when you read that article?
The feeling of being seen. I mean, I know that's not a feeling, but it's just like this whoosh of like, oh my God, it's a thing. I'm not crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was picturing was, just like a full body, like, wow, like this is what has been going on my whole life. And
I'm not alone.
And now just a feeling of reckoning. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So I don't know. What else would you like to know?
Well, so I know there are different types of relationships with each parent. And then, so with your, normally when we talk about parents, we're remembering them and, the fluffy things, right? So is it a situation where you want to talk about your dad and what do you remember about him? That type of thing? Or do you want to just kind of say what you've said and then move on to your mom?
No, I'm happy to talk about my dad. I actually end up talking about him a lot because he had such a profound effect on me.
Okay.
As difficult and painful as our relationship was, I wouldn't be doing the work I do now had I not been through that. I am a sex and intimacy coach because my father was sexually inappropriate with me. And I had to do so much work, and I continue to do so much work to move through that. And it doesn't make it okay. I am not making any excuses for him. And had that not happened, I wouldn't be as passionate as I am. So I end up talking about him a lot. Mm-hmm. He is a constant figure in my thinking, in my brain. And, in my low moments, which I have lots of, he is still an active voice in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that is one thing that we do talk about quite a bit is how our parents have affected us in what we're doing now. So I do see I hear when you're talking to people on your show that you are very passionate and you just know exactly the right things to say. So I am sorry that happened to you. I don't know if that's the right thing to say or not, but I am glad that you're able to be open about it and to use your experience to help other people.
Thank you. So my father went out similar to the way he came in, which is with a lot of confusion. So when he was born, we don't know if he was born on October 21st or October 22nd because everyone involved in his birth agreed that the date and time on the birth certificate was wrong, but nobody could agree on what the correct date and time was. So we just chose. And honestly, at this point, I get confused because I think for a while we did October 21st and then we went to October 22nd. I can't really remember. So there's all this confusion. He died alone in a hotel room overnight. We don't know if he died before midnight or after midnight. So we don't know what date he died on either. Super weird. But my dad, he had several different careers during his life. And at the time that he died, he was working as a private investigator and he focused on white collar mob cases. So this was like money laundering. And he was involved in a case that had a very high profile in New England, which is the Whitey Bulger case. And, so he was down in Florida following up on some, leads about where money had gone, I guess. I don't know. I didn't ask. And that's where he was when he died. So he was apparently working with an FBI agent on this case. Like he had a contact down there who he was in contact with. So when the hotel called the police and the police needed somebody to identify the body, they called the FBI agent. In Florida, when someone has died alone, they have a required autopsy. So he gets identified by the FBI agent. He gets taken to the coroner. They do an autopsy. And then my stepmother, without any, consultation at this point, I didn't even know he was dead yet. My stepmother authorized them to cremate his body. So I don't know the person who has identified his body. I know my father is a lunatic and had all of the skills to fake his own death if he chose to. And he had made a comment to me maybe a year before he died about how I think I need to get out of this line of work because the more that I'm sort of investigating the mobsters, the more I start thinking like them.
Oh, wow.
And so in my mind, the possibility exists that he has faked his own death, squirreled some money away in the Cayman Islands, and has gone. I recognized, even in my grief-stricken state, I recognized that was crazy. Like, that didn't make any sense. But my dad was also like, he was all over the place. It wasn't outside the realm of possibility. So then we had what people call a memorial service, but it was a party. It was a cocktail party. Again, I had absolutely no no say in planning this, but my dad had some rich and powerful friends. And so they rented out the top level of the Boston Museum of Science, which has huge plate glass windows looking out over the Charles River. And they did a full 4th of July fireworks show for my dad. And a fireboat came down the river and did a fire salute. Nobody got up and talked about him. Not a word was said. Literally, it was just people standing around drinking. And in the midst of this party, 2 of his colleagues from the private investigations firm came up to me and said, "I don't think your father's actually dead. I think he went under deep cover on the Whitey Bulger case."
So you're not crazy. See,
apparently I'm not crazy.
Also, how does a local police station just know that somebody's working with the FBI and know to call the FBI to get him identified?
Fuck if I know. Like, there's so much about this that is so bizarre to me. But I was not the next of kin. My stepmother was. And my stepmother and I mean, we got along okay, but we didn't have a close relationship by any stretch. So she just did what she wanted to do. And I had no part in it except to show up. So I spent 5 years thinking my father was going to come back, waiting for him to come back, having dreams many nights a week of what would happen when he came back, how I would respond. It was awful. It was pure hell. I went into a really, really deep depression and became pretty non-functional. I had sort of a part-time job where I would go, file stuff in an office, like real low-level tasks, because that was all I was capable of.
Were you afraid of that he would come back?
Yeah, I don't know that there was any particular emotion that went with it. I think I was in shock for 5 years. I think I was just in that state of, oh my God, what happens next? And if he comes back, what then? And if he doesn't come back, what then? It's like there was no living until this question was settled.
Right.
So in 2006, 5 years later, I had gotten onto antidepressants for the first time, which just made a world of difference for me. I started to become functional again. And one of the reasons I had not taken them in the past was because one of my father's messages to me was, you don't take pills to fix them. You fix them by working harder. So I had always, when I'd had therapists who said, you should probably be on an antidepressant, I'd said, no, that's a failure. That's me giving up. Thank God, finally, I went on, because then I was finally able to look at my life again. And I had started this spiritual development program. I spent 2 years studying with a woman named Iyanla Van Zant. And we had to do a bunch of projects to sort of close out old, unfinished things. And for me, obviously, that was, is my father dead or not? And how was I going to find that out? Well, thank God they did an autopsy. So there were autopsy photos. I had to go to my stepmother because, again, I was not legally next of kin. So I had to have her permission. And she was weirded out by the whole thing, understandably so. I mean, that is a weird request to get, but I got her to sign off on it, and I contacted the people in Florida, and I said, I need to see the autopsy photos, and had talked with a wonderful person down there. I'm so grateful, because they were like, okay, there's a whole range of autopsy photos, and there's going to be stuff you don't want to see. So let's figure out which photo will give you what you need to see without you seeing stuff that you don't want to. What I really wanted to see was his hands, because I knew that I would recognize his hands, but they didn't have any pictures of that. So they sent me a picture of his face. And it was odd, a dead face is odd after it was bloated and mottled, and, I was able to see my father in it, but it did not look like him. But I was finally able to put that to rest and say, yes, 5 years later, my father is actually dead.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember when I first got the phone call in 2000, I happened to be at home with my mom at the moment that the phone call came in. I worked in professional theater at the time, so I traveled a lot, but I happened to be at my mom's house when I got the phone call. And I immediately called her at work, and I was like, Mom, I need you. And my mom and my dad had been apart for quite a while at that point. So she had already done her grieving of him. And that was hard. I needed somebody to grieve with, and it couldn't be my mom. She was there with me, but she wasn't in it with me. So we went to one of our favorite places, this sort of waterfall area, and we just sat, and I sat and cried and was just in such shock. And she reached down and she picked up a stone, like the size of her palm, and she handed it to me, and she said, can you try putting all of your anger at your dad in this rock and throw it into the water and let it go? And I looked at her and I said, no, it's all I've got left of him now. And something about that sits so heavily. I feel so sad that girl, 20 years ago, felt that she didn't have anything of her father except anger. Yeah, that makes me sad.
So what do you feel like this time that you've had now and the work that you've done now, what do you feel like you have left of him now?
He's in me, he is part of who I am. yes, he's some of the harder parts of who I am, the dysfunction, the voices in my head, all of that stuff. But he's also the part of me that's super passionate and driven and ambitious and has this like thirst for knowledge, and all of that is him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's by necessity, it took me a while to figure all that out, to see that. I had to, my dad had a really hard early life. His mother desperately wanted a little girl. And so she dressed him as a little girl and called him by a little girl's name until he was like 5.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of what gives me such incredible empathy for people who are transgender, because I know how badly it messed him up to be misgendered, even at that young an age. He ran away from home for the first time at 3 years old on a tricycle. And he got like 5 miles away from home before the police picked him up. Am I angry at what happened? Yes. The way he treated me, the things he did were not okay. I have also come to understand that he had no parenting skills because nobody parented him. And we don't afford men in this culture the opportunity to do the kind of healing work that we make available to women. Some men do, obviously, and thank God, but it's a very difficult path. So I have compassion for my dad now in a way that I couldn't earlier in my life.
And as we know, everyone is different. Their experience is different, but I feel like that happens to everyone is, we're with our parents. We just don't have that understanding to just understand. I don't have the understanding to understand. And then once time, we have that time and we've grown and we've evolved and then we're able to have more understanding,
Yeah.
But I feel like for you that that goes deeper than a lot of people. I'm glad that you were able to kind of come to this now and to a spot where you're able to move forward.
Thank you. Some days better than others.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you remember like a saying or anything that your dad would say, or did he do jokes or just...
Oh my God, so many. I mean, one was, I'm not one to lecture, but, which he didn't know was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. Oh God, there were so many. I mean, so many hurtful things, but also, he would often say, some days we eat the bears and some days the bears eat us. Things like that. I was just reminded, a couple of weeks ago of something that he didn't ever say this to me, but I heard about it from my mom, and somebody just reminded me of this, who was friends with her, that, I am not entirely sure what the state of his fidelity to my mother was during their marriage, though I know that it was not complete. And one of the things that he said to her was, well, if you have a big dog, then you have to have a big yard, meaning he has to have lots of area to roam.
Well, there's your answer then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he sounds like, did he have a big personality then?
He had a huge personality. Yeah. He was the kind of person who, when he entered the room, all of the air was sucked out. And that makes it sound like a bad thing. It's just like all of the attention went to him. But he also collected kind of rich and famous people as his friends. And so when he was in a room with them, he would like be a little bit subservient to them. Yeah, it was, he had some real interesting quirks. And then at home, it was totally different, you know, and this is one of those qualities of narcissism that I now see, that out in public, he was this sort of voluble, you know, awesome guy who everybody loved. And then at home, all of that went away. Not all of it. He still had a very big personality, but we didn't get that piece of him. We didn't get the jovial, happy guy. We got the tortured man behind closed doors.
Mm. You say we. Did you have brothers and sisters?
No, just me and my mom.
Mm.
Yeah.
How long were your parents together?
So they were together for 5 years before they got married, then 5 years before they had me. And then I was 15, I think, when he moved to a different city for a job. But it took another 2 to 3 years before they actually admitted that they were separated. So like there was this very weird, like he would come home once every couple of months and still expect to sleep in my mom's bed with her. So it's hard to know exactly when that actually happened, but they got divorced. They had agreed that a divorce wasn't like a priority. So it just was sort of like they were separated and that was fine, until one day he sent her a letter and said, I'm getting remarried in 3 months. You need to give me a divorce by then. And here are the terms that you will be accepting, which then turned into a very nasty divorce proceeding. But he did, in fact, get married. And part of the letter was, and I will be getting married whether we're divorced or not.
Oh,
yeah, because, you know, that's normal.
So when they weren't living together, did you still go see him, or did you stay with your mom?
I primarily stayed with my mom. I would go down every once in a while, but by that point, I was pretty scared of. I had a real love-hate relationship with him because he was this big, fun guy who sometimes I could have big fun with. But there was also the sexual impropriety. And I hope it's okay. I'd like to clarify what that means, because some people will make assumptions about what that means. My dad was verbally inappropriate with me. He made sexual comments about my body. He talked to me about sex in inappropriate ways. He talked to me about his sex life with my mom and how unhappy he was about it. He talked to me about my body and how my body was fat and unappealing. That I would never find anybody to love me, that kind of stuff. It did not include touching me, except one night when I was 12, when he was blackout drunk, and too drunk, in fact, to get his hands under my clothes. Thank God. So he touched me, but over my clothes. But after that night, I was scared. And so it was, my mom figured out how to make him believe it was his idea to send me to boarding school so that I didn't have to live in the house with him. And then he moved. And so anytime that I was going to see him, I had to see him alone. And there's one night in particular that I remember him being drunk, and he had a pull-out couch. that I would sleep on. But for whatever reason that night, he was like, oh, come sleep in my bed with me. Come sleep in my bed with me. And I was like, I'd rather sleep on the couch. And he was like, no, come sleep on my bed with me. You sleep with your mother sometimes. Why won't you do it with me? At that level of manipulation, I'm 16. What was I going to say? So I said yes. And I did not sleep that night. I just clung to the edge of the bed, waiting for the night to be over. So I saw him as infrequently as possible.
Mm-hmm. Did you talk to him? Because my question I think is going to be, is his absence during that time, but I don't know if I can call it an absence. Do you feel like that had an effect on you either way?
I talked to him on the phone, probably at least once a week, I would think. And talking to him was always a mixed bag because I so desperately wanted his approval. But mostly what I got was lectures.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please consider sharing the show with a friend or rating and reviewing wherever you're listening right now. This will help get the word out about the show, and if one person can be helped by listening to someone's story here, that is amazing. If you would like to share your story with me, you can visit the website at www.backhommedia.com/parentlesspodcast. You can also email me at parentlesspodcast@gmail.com. Another way to get a hold of me is to find me on Instagram or Facebook, also at Parentless Podcast. And lastly, if you're a phone person, please leave me a voicemail at 623-396-6069. If you love the show and you'd like to help with any special projects that might go on at Parentless Podcast or just be privy to some special extras, go ahead and visit patreon.com/parentlesspodcast.
Yeah. And you have said here that you're not married, and I know the answer, but do you have any kids?
I do not.
Okay. So do you feel like your upbringing and just the way that you saw their marriage and all of that, does that have an effect on you today about if you're married or not?
Huge. Absolutely huge. I saw my parents be miserable together. So for a long time, I thought, why would I do that? I'm open to the idea now. I've been in a relationship with my current partner for a little over 3 years. And in fact, we had a conversation about it just the other day where we both agreed, like, it's something that might happen in the future, but it's not something that either of us are looking for. But the decision to not have kids was very conscious for a lot of reasons. But one of the big ones is I didn't want to visit this level of trauma onto a child. And I was not stable enough to be a parent who didn't pass that trauma on until I was in my 40s. And also, I feel like I spent a lot of my life being so scared and so shut down that now that I'm finally living my life, I want to live my life, I didn't want to give that over to raising a child.
Mm-hmm. That is super interesting. Yeah. And for you, like you said, that you just wanted his approval and you got other things.
Yeah.
So, well, I think you're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks. And a lot of that is thanks to my mom and the fact that she held me through those 5 years of total incapacity. Like literally, I lived at her house because I couldn't live on my own at that point.
Was your mom more in the camp of, of course he's dead, yes, he died, or did she just kind of?
Oh, that's an interesting question. She always held open the possibility that, yes, that was a possibility. I don't think that she didn't encourage that belief in me. I think she wanted me to be able to move on and to say, like, okay, let's at least just pretend that he's dead. If you can't actually believe it, can we at least just pretend? But But yeah, she recognized the possibility that could be the case.
Before we finish up about your dad, do you want to say his name?
Bob.
All right. Thank you. And what is your mom's name?
My mom's name is Sybil.
Okay.
And I miss her every day. Every day.
Tell me about your mom.
My mom was my soulmate, I believe. I also believe that's part of what made it easier for me to not get married at any point, was that I had my person. We talked every day, often multiple times a day. And for the last 15 years of her life, well, part of that I lived with her. And then I moved to an apartment that was like 10, 15 minutes away. So we were very much in each other's lives. She lived in rural New Hampshire. And so I lived in rural New Hampshire because I wanted to be near her. It was not a great place to have, the rest of my life was not very full, but it was really important to me to be near her. She grew up in the South, the Southern United States, and that was a really difficult thing for her. She didn't like being hot, first of all, so it was miserable, but also just the culture of the South was not a good fit for her. So she left as soon as she could, went to college in Indiana, which she said was as far as she was even able to conceive of. Like, that was as far away as the world went, And then she and her college roommate threw a dart at a map and chose Boston as the place they would settle. All of which makes her sound very adventurous. I think she had an adventurous spirit when she was young. Then she met my dad, and he beat it out of her. It wasn't until after her death that I found a bunch of pictures that I had never seen before. And I don't think that she was hiding them from me. I just think that they, got stashed away and I never saw them. But it was shocking to see pictures of my mom from college and from before she met my dad, because that was a woman I never met. That sort of strong, sassy red dress with, lipstick. I never met that woman, because my dad really effectively beat that out of her. Not literally. He was not physically abusive, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, you said that they had 10 years together before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good amount of time for
it's a long time, and
somebody to change you.
Yeah. And when I was born, I think my mom began to realize how difficult it would be to raise a child with my father. And he said to her, "If you ever leave me, I will take Leah and you will never see her again." I spent a long time being really angry at my mom for not protecting me from my dad. I had no idea that she had stayed in order to protect me. Like, my thought as I was a teenager, I was like, why don't you just leave him? Why don't we go somewhere far away? I had no idea that he had this threat hanging over her. That he absolutely, a man who can fake his own death can also make a child disappear. Those were legitimate threats coming from him. Mm. So she stayed. She basically gave up her life in order to make sure that I was safe. Because the options were stay with my dad as a trio, or leave my dad and I would be alone with him.
Of course, along with his personality too, but the way, the comments that you mentioned that he would make, about the yard and all of that, and even the letter and the way that he said he was going to get remarried. Of course that makes sense, that he felt like he could just talk to her that way. And that was, he knew she wasn't going to go.
Yeah. And the thing that amazes me is that she held all of that information until after he died. She didn't tell me a lot of this stuff until I was in my early 30s, which, I mean, I could argue either side of whether that would have been useful information to have earlier or not. But I really think that she didn't want to poison my relationship with him any further than it already was. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm grateful for that. And I'm massively amazed at her discretion, at her ability to hold that. I wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, that is an amazing ability. When was your mom born?
She was born in 1944. She was a Jew in the southern United States at the time when, Hitler was in the world. And that was extraordinarily scary for her. That, I think, had a huge impact on her life. The feeling that she needed to hide who she was or she would be in danger.
And when did she pass away?
In 2015, December of 2015.
Okay. And was her death expected or unexpected?
She'd had cancer for 2 years, so it was expected. It was pretty much the polar opposite of my dad. His was very unexpected and it happened sort of out of sight. My mom, she was diagnosed in 2013. So we basically had 2 years together, almost exactly 2 years from the time of her diagnosis to the time of her death. They found the cancer too late. So they did treatments, but it was always kind of a long shot that it would, that she would go into permanent remission or long-term remission. But there were 3 of us, me, her best friend, and my mom. And we did everything together. We went to every appointment together. We lived in New Hampshire. She was being treated in Boston. So it was about a 2.5-hour drive for every appointment. They had a hotel. We went to Dana-Farber in Boston, which is a major medical center, and they have a hotel sort of attached to the hospital. So we would stay in the hospital hotel, and it was a really hard, scary 2 years in which I held out a lot of hope for a miracle cure. But it was also incredibly special because once we knew there was kind of a time limit on our time together, it made every moment that much more important. Yeah. We'd always been close, but there was something about that time that was really remarkable.
So at that time you mentioned, you had lived with her and then you lived in the same town. So when she was sick, did you live with her or separate?
I stayed in my own apartment for most of that time. I would go spend, nights with her, but I remained living in my own apartment until maybe the last 2 or 3 months when I moved in, and then actually, I think her best friend and I both we never talked about it, but we were all just sort of in the house together for those last couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Our audience won't be able to see you now. And by the time this is released, I'm not quite sure what they will see. However, we have video. And so I see that you have a shaved head.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to see your post about that. So take me through kind of that experience, how it relates to your mom and kind of your feelings through that.
Yeah. So when my mom she went through 2 separate rounds of chemotherapy. That's actually not true. She went through 1 round of chemotherapy, went into remission, then it recurred, and they were going to put her on chemotherapy again, but she was allergic to it. And rather than putting her body through that, she decided to stop treatment. With the first round, though, it was a type of chemotherapy that causes you to lose your hair. I found out that not every chemo does that, which surprised me. That was new information for me. But, she'd been through the first 2 cycles, I think, and her hair was starting to come out. And so we decided that we would have a shaving party for her. We would invite over a handful of her closest friends. And, we set her up in the middle of the living room with a sheet under her and a sheet around her shoulders. And basically all of her closest friends got to take a swipe with the razor of her head. And then Sue, her best friend, and I finished it off. And I had caught her several times prior to that looking at herself in the mirror. And I could just tell she was contemplating what she was going to look like without hair. And we had a couple conversations about it, like her wondering, oh, what's this going to be like? And so I thought, I had seen other stories of people who had shaved their heads in solidarity or, in support of their loved one who was going through chemo. And I thought, if she needs that, I'm there, totally going to do it. That is a no-brainer. But the day that it happened, she just went with it. She had a great time. And she looked amazing with a shaved head, like amazing. She had a perfect head for it. I have a photo of her that every time I look at it, I'm like, she just looks like a warrior, So there was no reason for me to shave my head because at that point it would have been attention seeking rather than support, given how well she was doing. So for the last, whatever that would have been in 2014. So for the last 6 or 7 years, I've had this question in my head of like, what would I look like with a shaved head? And so finally, about 3 weeks ago, I did it. I had a couple of my best girlfriends come over and I had hair down past my shoulders. And so they took scissors and they cut it short and then they took a razor and they shaved it. And we had a lot of fun. It was a really fun night. And yeah, now it turns out I have a pretty good shaped head for this. It is, I thought that 3 weeks in, I'd be used to it. I'm not used to it yet.
Is it a shock every time you look in the mirror?
It's not the looking in the mirror and being like, oh, who is that? It's just there's a lot of vanity. I didn't realize I had so much vanity tied up in my hair. And I didn't realize how much time I spent every day thinking about my hair and making decisions based on whether my hair would look good or not. Like, can I ride with the windows down in my car? No, because that will make my hair frizzy and poof out. Or, like, can I shower or not shower before this video call because my hair looks like a mess, but I don't have time to dry it? Like stuff like that. I spent so much time thinking about it. I did it in honor of my mom. And so I'm still feel weird about it, but I'm glad I did it.
Well, I think you look great. And that was one of my questions actually, is if you had a picture of your mom with her head shaved, because I would be interested to see those together.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you did it in honor of your mom. So I know you said you had a good time and all of this, but was it emotional a little bit as you were doing it in reference to your mom?
I thought it would be, and it wasn't. Yeah, I was surprised by how much fun we had. I expected to be crying, and I wasn't. Yeah.
You have me like 25% thinking about maybe I should do that, but probably I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm pretty sure my head is not shaped great for a shaved head. Also, I don't know if my husband would stay. No, he would.
Well, I have to say that my boyfriend has always, from day one of our relationship, has always been like, it's your hair, do whatever you want with it. So I knew that I had his buy-in. The first time he saw me, he put on a really big smile that I was like, I don't think that's an actual smile. But now he thinks it's really cute.
Good. Now, do you think you're going to leave it like that, or are you going to grow? I mean, it's only been 3 weeks. So
I have no idea. I don't have a plan. I think that I probably need to keep it this length at least until I make peace with it. I haven't made peace with it yet. I actually just said to my boyfriend this morning, this is, I mean, it's been 3 weeks, but I did trim it once. So this is probably about 2 weeks. And I said to him this morning, when it was shaved, it felt like a choice. It felt like a really strong choice. This reminds me too much of my mom's hair growing back in. This looks to me like cancer hair. And this is hard. Yeah. So I think that I need to hang here somewhere between shaved and, a couple weeks growth for a while until I make peace with it. When my mom's hair grew back in, it was a great celebration. This doesn't feel like a celebration. Maybe that's the thing, when I shaved it, it was fun. It was a party. Now I think I'm into the sadness and the grief of it. It just took a few weeks. Yeah.
Well, that's an experience, and I like that you are open to having that experience. My mom had very long hair. That was her, she believed that God didn't want you to cut your hair. And so that was her thing. And she'd always kept it up. And so we did, cut her hair and shave it off. And but she chose to do a wig and to have it look just as close as she could get it to her regular hair. But yeah, that's why I really paid attention to, once I noticed you weren't just shaving your head and you mentioned you were talking about your mom, and I was like, oh, well, what a thing to do. So let's move into more about your mom. Does she have a phrase, anything that she would just say that really sticks with you?
Oh, God. Similar to my dad, so many. And it's funny, I hear her coming out of my mouth so much lately, even more than before she died. It's, she grew up in a home with a lot of Yiddish. And so there were lots of Yiddish phrases, go schlaf, which means go sleep. Talking about the whole mishpacha is completely meshugana. The whole family is crazy. Stuff like that. It's funny. I'm having a hard time bringing something specific back up.
Yeah, no, those were great examples. And I've never thought about learning Yiddish before, but now it sounds like a great idea to learn some.
There are lots of great phrases.
So you told us that you thought your mom was your soulmate, and I love that description. Do you ever talk to your mom now? Do you talk out loud to her? Do you do anything like that?
Yeah, I talk to her a lot in my head. Though I have to say, it's interesting just thinking in this moment, I probably do it a lot less now than I did the first couple of years. Yeah, but I think about her a lot. I think about, what would she advise me to do? She was she was my companion in so many ways. She was my best friend in that we did lots of things together and we had a great time together and we laughed all the time. We also pushed each other's buttons like nobody else because you're mother and daughter, you know where all the buttons are. But in addition to all of that, she was kind of my spiritual mentor in a lot of ways. So I am a writer. That's one of the things that I do. My father was a writer and my mother was an editor. So like I grew up in a house where their words were very important.
Wow.
Losing her as my,
Sorry, that's words were so important in your house, and then the words were used the way that they were used.
Yeah.
So, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So she was my editor. I never sent anything out, at least nothing important that she hadn't looked at first. So it's taken me 5 years to finally get to the point where I can allow other people to start to come into that role in my life. It was just maybe 6 months ago that I'm working on a memoir about my journey of sexual healing. And I actually sent the first draft out to an editor who I had to pay because they weren't my mom. And that was an incredibly difficult thing.
Wow. So a big moment to send out your book to.
Yeah.
And did you feel like you had to replace your mom? And that's that way? Yeah.
Yeah. And she and we had spent so many years looking at so many words together. It was like we had our own language, you know, and that's not something I'll ever have with anybody again. That's really hard. That hurts.
Yeah. I feel like, that might be similar to, sending your baby off to somebody that you don't know and you've never met. Like, here, take care of this for me, but I don't know you. Wow. Well, and then, so my next question would be if you were able, and I don't say this in a way of if you have any regrets or anything like that, but just if you had a day with your mom, what would you say to her if you could?
There are so many questions that I have come up with since she died that I never asked her. I think I would like to spend a day asking her questions, especially because so much of our relationship was about me. Like she spent a lot of time supporting me and making sure I was okay. And, that's okay. That's sort of the natural way of things. But yeah, I would like to spend a day learning so much more about her. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's when, we're in the role of being a daughter and mother, and it's more like you said, mothers are taking care and daughters may be busy just being self-centered daughters, and then
totally
get to find out about mom. And then
I was totally a self-centered daughter. Yes, without question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So how has and you've touched on it here and there, but how has the death of your mom affected you?
Profoundly. My entire life is different as a result of her death. So my mom, like I said, we were on that cancer journey, and she never would call it a fight or a struggle. People say, I'm fighting cancer. I am in the cancer struggle. She never would say that. She always said, cancer is in my body, so I'm going to work with my body. I'm not fighting my body. I loved that. So we were on this cancer journey for 2 years. And then it got to the point where it was clear that it was terminal. She was going downhill. We were in the end stages. And so we contacted hospice. She was still in her own home. Sue and I had more or less moved in. And I think all three of us were obviously not excited about hospice because that meant that the end was coming, but had heard enough about hospice and were really looking forward to the support and the care that we knew hospice could provide. And unfortunately, in our case, hospice was an absolute disaster. This is not common, so I don't want anybody to hear this and be like, oh no, I shouldn't do it. This is super uncommon. But again, we lived in a rural area. Wages are very low. There's very high turnover. And so I think what we experienced was just a pure lack of training. But it was bad. It was real bad. So, for instance, one of the things that hospice is supposed to do is take care of the whole patient. They're not necessarily there to do doctor stuff. They're there to take care of the emotional needs, or not take care of. They're not in charge of it, but to support the whole family. And the hospice nurse came one day and she asked my mom, what's going on? And mom started to tell her, and mom was very in tune with her sort of internal landscape, with her emotions and everything that was going on. And she started telling the nurse that she was having some difficulty. And the nurse said, oh, if it's not something that I can give you medication for, you don't need to bother telling me about it, which is like the antithesis of what hospice is supposed to be. So by the time mom died, I was extraordinarily angry. I wanted nothing more than to give my mother a good death. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I wanted it more than anything. She was the most important person in my world. I wanted her to have a peaceful, calm death. And she didn't. She was agitated. Every time somebody from hospice came, she was agitated. The last 24 hours of her life were really difficult. And Sue and I, we were no longer in a position where we could care for her. Her physical needs were too much. It was not appropriate for us to be caring for her at that point. And so, the hospice director came over to the house and we said, we need to move her to the hospital. And the hospice director tried to shame us into keeping her at home. She was basically like, well, she said she wanted to die at home. Don't you want to follow her last wishes? It's like, screw you. And I finally said to her, if mom knew what incredible distress Sue and I are in right now, she would be the first one to tell us to take her to the hospital. So anyway, we got her to the hospital, thank God. And she passed. And I was so angry. I was working as a journalist at a newspaper, a daily newspaper in Vermont. And when I went back to work, I said to my editor, this was nothing about what just happened is okay. I want to write about them. I want to burn the whole thing to the ground. Let's just take them down. And of course, my editor is like, let's sell papers. Sure, let's burn them down. Thank God. I took a minute to breathe and I came back to him a couple of weeks later. And I said, actually, that's not what I want to do. Hospice is really important. I just want them to be better. So let's spend a year, or I will spend a year writing articles about how to give our loved ones a good death and hopefully teach the people at hospice how to do this better. The newspaper was incredible. They gave me carte blanche to write whatever I wanted for a year. So it was a 26-part series every other Tuesday. And I got to just have incredible conversations with people, learn so much about supporting our loved ones through dying, finally came up with what I think is a good definition of what a good death is. A good death is not actually about the person who's dying. It's about those of us who are left behind feeling like we did as much as we could do and that we are at peace with their dying process. Maybe not with their death, with them being gone, but that we did as much as we could do to give them a gentle dying process. So I was in the process of trying to turn this 26-part series into a published book, looking for a publisher, sort of navigating those waters. And at some point in there, I realized this was now 18 months after my mom's death that I'd come to the end of this, writing this series. And I'm talking to agents and stuff. And I realized I've spent the last 18 months basically eating, sleeping, breathing death. And if I publish this as a book, I'm going to have to spend another 18 months at least eating, breathing, sleeping death. And I don't think I can do that anymore. I think I need to live. I think I need to put this down and live. So at that point, I had settled my mom's estate, which, because I was an only child, was pretty seamless. I was able to sell her house, which, was one of her great gifts to me, that she owned her home. And I decided I was going to take an extended road trip around the United States. I didn't know how long. I sort of roughly gave myself as much as a year. And my whole goal was to find a new place to live, because I had stayed in New Hampshire to be near my mom, but with her gone, there was no reason to stay. And while I was on the road, I had this profound sexual awakening experience and spent a year just laser focused on sex and sexuality and sexual healing. And none of that could have happened without my mom. The harder part of that sentiment is that none of that could have happened without my mom's passing. I wouldn't have done it. As long as she was alive, I wouldn't have left. So I wish so dearly that she could see me now, that I could call her and talk to her about what I've experienced and what I've done. But I feel pretty sure that she's out there somewhere, whatever that looks like. She's out there so excited.
Yep. You grew your wings.
Yeah.
Flew away.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the ironic part of, losing our parents, not having them anymore, is what we go on to do. And, so everything has an effect on us. And
for sure.
Yeah. I did notice you do projects apparently in a year's worth of time.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. You're right.
So maybe I need to extend my goal lengths there. Need to do projects that are in a year. But one thing I wanted to ask about your newspaper series. So is that available anywhere? Or
it is available. I have it up on my website now. It's called Living with Dying, and I'll give you the link to put in your show notes.
Very good. And the other thing I noticed too is you said that you were eating, breathing, talking, sleeping death.
Yeah.
But you were doing that with other people's deaths and their experiences. Did you also bring your personal experience into that with your mom?
I did. In fact, I love that you asked that question. So the newspaper, again, was incredible. They were so supportive of this. They basically gave me a page of the newspaper once every other week to fill however I wanted. Like, that is just not something that happens. So there would every other week, each entry, there would be the main article, and then I would do a personal reflection about sort of what I had learned from that week's story, or how I reflected back on my experience with my mom. I got to interview the nurses who cared for her as she was dying. In a funny twist of fate, they were not able to confirm that they were her nurses when she was dying because of HIPAA, but I was able to write about their experiences as nurses for dying people. And then talk about the incredible gift it was that these two specific women had been in the room with us, because I wanted to be the last person my mom saw. I wanted to be the one who was holding her when she died. And unfortunately, because of the physical manifestations of her symptoms, that wasn't possible. And so it was one of these nurses who was the last person. And I'm so grateful that she was so kind and so caring. So I was able to write about all of that. Yeah.
Do you feel like that was healing for you at all?
Hugely. I don't think I could have moved forward. I was so angry from the hospice experience. I don't think I could have moved forward without having that type of in-depth processing. Yeah, I needed that. And I needed other people to witness it. You know, it's one thing to go to a therapist, and I did. I was in therapy for a lot of that time too. But it was something completely different for me to be able to do it in a way that other people were witnessing it and getting something out of it too. That made a big difference for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that still, is so important, and it's always going to be important, because death, we don't speak about death usually. And people don't know how to handle it. So I think what a great project. And I did not know about that because maybe I haven't been to your website yet.
That's fair. Also, most of my website is about sex, so you could be forgiven for not digging in enough to find the death.
You just brought up therapy, and you mentioned it in the beginning. So tell me about therapy.
Therapy has been real good for me.
Long story short, good deal.
Yes, I have been in and out of therapy since I was a teenager. And yeah, a lot of that time people were saying to me, you might want to think about antidepressants. And I was like, no. So if there's anybody out there listening to this who thinks that you are a failure because you need antidepressants, please hear my voice saying this is not a case of failing. This is a case of your brain having a chemical imbalance. I am not advocating for everybody to be on meds, for sure, but there are some of us who need them. I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, and without the meds, I'm a mess. Beyond that, I have done a lot of talk therapy in my life, and that has served its purpose, for sure. But in the time following my mom's death, I went to a different kind of therapy called EMDR, eye movement something or other. I can never remember what the letters stand for. And it was helpful in a way that talk therapy never was for me. I was able to process through some things from my childhood that had never been accessible to me. I was just able to go through a lot of stuff a lot more effectively and efficiently than I ever had before. So yeah, I certainly recommend EMDR for people who have found talk therapy to be less than fully effective.
Do you have any advice to others who have lost parents, just in your whole experience of losing two parents?
I think that something that was incredibly helpful to me in the immediate aftermath of my mom's passing was that I had a friend whose mother had died just about a year before mine. And we didn't talk all that often, but the fact that she was there and could sort of be my big sister through the experience, and I could call her and be like, I feel crazy right now. And she could say, oh no, I remember that feeling. Like, that makes sense to me. That was really helpful. So finding a big sister, and maybe that's in a grief group, maybe that's online somewhere. Like, there are places that those people where you can find those people if they're not immediately in your life. But I think finding someone, not just someone whose parents have died, but somebody who has been through a similar loss relatively recently, because they're still going to remember what it means to be right in it. Mm-hmm. That was incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm. I like that you were able to find somebody who was right there in it. And I know when you spoke about your dad's death, you said, no, my mom was not right there in it.
Yes, exactly.
So,
yeah.
Wow. Well, Leah, I look forward to whatever comes in the future. And would you like to tell everybody how they can contact you or find you if they want to?
Absolutely. So my website is leahcarey.com. That's LeahCarey.com. Most of it is about sex. There is also some stuff about death. And that direct link I'll give you. My podcast is Good Girls Talk About Sex, where I interview people who were brought up as little girls, plus transgender men, about their experience of sex and female sexuality. It's a non-expert show. It's just like this, actually. It's people telling their real stories. And you can find me on Instagram at Good Girls Talk. I mentioned I'm working on the memoir now. I'm in the midst of complete rewrite, and I'm sending pieces of it out to my email list every other week as I'm working on it. So when you're at my website, if you'd like to be on that list, just sign up for the newsletter and you will get that.
Oh, what a nice treat. All right, Leah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for telling me about your parents and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is such a beautiful show, and thank you for having these beautiful conversations.
Yeah, well, thank you for being open to being here with me. That's what's important. All right. Thank you, Leah. Take care.
Thank you.
Parentless podcast is recorded in Phoenix, Arizona. Find us on social media and most major podcast platforms. Music provided by Colin Lococo and the Revolving Birds. Studio and editing provided by Back Home Media and Ian Relaford. Check out one of the many shows on our network. I am your host, Stephanie Relaford.